To talk more about this intel report, I'm joined by former CIA analyst Ray McGovern. Welcome, Ray. Nice to see you. So what we heard in this meeting today, one of the things that we heard is that Al-Qaeda linked the Al-Qaeda and associated forces, that they remain a threat. And we're seeing this, the data that's coming out. Want to take a look at just Iraq as one example. Let's take a look at Iraq. This report from the Iraq body count shows that the number of deaths there is raising. We see it kind of at its highest in 2007, and it dips down, and we see that number going back up with the most recent year, almost as high as numbers almost 2008. So we're seeing that violence is on the upswing in Iraq. You know, but last night we heard from the president saying that, you know, kind of touting that the war in Afghanistan is coming to an end. Did this hearing kind of highlight that the threat is not really minimized today?
Well, we destroyed Iraq, and we put Sunni against Shia, and the inevitable result is what we've seen. There were 70 killed on Sunday. I haven't checked the figure since. Yeah. So there's nothing to be proud of what we did to Iraq, and we never did get the two sides agreeing to compromise so that it could be a viable government. Instead, what we did during the surge, for example, was to supervise the ethnic cleansing of Baghdad from a predominantly Sunni city into a predominantly Shia city. We could see the lights go out in the Sunni neighborhood. So the inevitable result of that is what we're seeing, civil war, and Afghanistan's not going to be much better. So why we're going to leave 100,000, 10,000 people in Afghanistan? Well, we know why. We want the military bases. We want to be able to fly these drones around, and without the military base, we can't do that. So, you know, it's so cynical. That's very little to do with Al-Qaeda in Pakistan and in Afghanistan. We were told 3 years ago there are only 100 left, or maybe 50. Well, yeah, there are a lot in Africa, in Libya, and of course in Syria now. But that's, you know, the drones are not helping that. They are creating more and more insurgents. They're recruiting stations for them.
Yeah, we're seeing this sectarian violence not only in Iraq, but in Libya and elsewhere. You know, one thing we heard in this meeting as well today is really Russia. They identified as a potential danger, especially when it comes to cybersecurity. I mean, we're seeing how all these dangers in this world from Libya, from Iraq, and the surge of terrorism that it hasn't really been quelled all these years later. I mean, why is Russia identified as such a threat, and are these fears warranted that we hear today?
Well, there's a lot of money in it. I mean, Eisenhower talked about the military-industrial complex. Now we have a military-industrial, media, congressional, security services complex.
This is a lot of complexes.
It's complex. All of them enmeshed in a way that is not very far from the F word, fascism. That's what Mussolini defined as when the government, the corporations, and the media, and the security services, and everybody else sort of singing from the same sheet of music as they did today about this terrible threat that Ed Snowden has, you know, I tell my grandsons, you shouldn't call people liars, so we call them prevaricators, okay? Now,
sounds nicer.
Yeah, it does. And, you know, the fact that James Clapper would ask us to give him credibility when he lied, bald-faced lied under oath, and then later said, well, what I said was clearly erroneous, but, you know, why should we believe him this time? These threats remind me of the ones when Bradley Manning, Chelsea Manning, released all those documents. Oh, the terrible things are going to happen in Afghanistan and Iraq, terrible things by troops and so forth. And finally, Carl Evans said to Bobby Gates, Mr. Secretary, please give us a paper. And he gave him the paper and said, well, contrary to our worst fears, nobody has been so much as spat upon. Now, he didn't say it exactly that way, but the command said the same thing. Later, Gates said the charges that this was great damage were, quote, fairly significantly overwrought. And I think that phrase probably obtains with respect to Snowden.
Yes, and James Clapper today, you had mentioned Clapper, and he brought up Snowden today. Snowden was on that debate floor today. Some Republicans, as we've heard, has gone as far to say that Snowden works for Russian intelligence. Clapper demanded that Snowden return these documents that he said that he stole, and he went as far as to call journalists that publish these things their accomplices. Yeah. And I want to ask you, because you're one of the few people that actually got to go over to Russia and spend some time with Snowden. What's your response to these accusations, calling him a spy, in all these developments we heard today?
You know, I was young enough to, I'm old enough to remember the McCarthy hearings, okay? When charges like this were flung about with no substantive basis, and we know what happened then. Now, for the head of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Rogers, who himself is a failed FBI agent, you know, he was sort of eased out before he was even vested, and we don't know the whole story about that, but the FBI covers up for these things very well. For him to come out and pour suspicion on Ed Snowden without citing any evidence, well, that's McCarthy. Not even Dianne Feinstein agreed with that, you know. And when Jocelyn Radek, one of Ed's attorneys, was asked about that, she said, you know, the FBI thinks he acted alone, you know. Have you checked that out, Mike Rogers? Rogers was at a meeting run by the Washington Post where General Michael Hayden, who used to head up the NSA, was talking about a list. Snowden was on a list, not the Nobel Prize list, but another list, okay? And he said, I know what list I'd like to put him on, okay? That's Hayden. Now, Mike Rogers was there, and he immediately interjected, he says, yeah, I can help you on that, okay? Now, this was a meeting, no, it wasn't a meeting of the mafia or anything. This was an open meeting run by the Washington Post. There was no coverage later. But what they were saying was, we send a little drone, put them on the kill list, right? That's the list, and we put a little drone. Now, the supreme irony is that Ed Snowden, not by his choice, but by happenstance, is in the safest possible part of the world that he could be, because no drones are going to zap him with a Hellfire missile, and no SEAL Team 6s are going to go in there and shoot him in the head like they did to Osama bin Laden.
We're going to have to leave it off there, Ray. Always great to have you on. Sorry, unfortunately, we're running out of time. That was former CIA analyst Ray McGovern.